Order, please. We'll begin the daily routine presenting reading petitions. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition on behalf of the residents of Salt Springs and Mount Tom in Pictou County concerning the very poor condition of Trunk 4 Highway. And the operative clause reads, "We, the undersigned residents and users of Trunk 4, which extends through Lower Mount Tom from exit 21 at Alma to Truro, hereby petition the Department of Transportation and Public Works to pave the road beginning at the Weeks Quarry and extending a distance of 3.7 kilometers to the Pictou-Colchester County line and extending a further 2.3 kilometers to the County of Colchester for a total of 6 kilometers. And it's been signed by 148 local residents, and I too have affixed my signature.
Thank you. The document is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Table reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a report from the Workers' Compensation Board of Nova Scotia, their annual report for 2003, entitled Safety Starts With You.
Report is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notice of motion. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Hashoah, the Holocaust, refers to the state-sponsored systemic persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by the Nazis between 1933 and 1945. And whereas the lives of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were taken at the hands of the Nazis. And whereas Yom HaShoah, which this year falls on Sunday, April the 18th, is recognized through legislation as Holocaust Memorial Day in Nova Scotia, a day to remember. Therefore be it resolved that all members recognize the significance of this day, which stands both as a symbol of one of history's most treacherous incidents of man's inhumanity to man, and hence a time to honor those victims of the Holocaust and its survivors, and those who lost their lives fighting to end the tyranny of the Nazis. I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Arnold Sarty was an institution in the Nova Scotia Public Service, serving for 18 years as Auditor General. He was appointed as Auditor General of the Province of Nova Scotia in 1965 and held that position with distinction until retirement in 1983. Whereas Arnold Sarty worked on behalf of the people of the province in a capable and selfless manner, earning the admirations of his colleagues and community. And whereas the province of Nova Scotia has benefited greatly from Mr. Arnold Sarty's wise financial counsel, who served the province with dedication and commitment. Therefore be it resolved that all members of this House join me in saluting the memory of Arnold Sarty and extending our gratitude for his years of service and the enormous contribution to the government and the people of this province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas thousands of Nova Scotians contributed to the overwhelming success of the World Women's Hockey Championships hosted here in Halifax from March 30th to April 6th. And whereas this edition of the World Women's Hockey Championship set a new record attendance, attracting 94,001 spectators to 20 games. And whereas organizers and volunteers from all over our province and beyond have much to be proud of, including another gold medal win for Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate and thank everyone involved in making the World Women's Hockey Championship a great success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this government is committed to improving the transportation infrastructure of Nova Scotia, and whereas better highways help all Nova Scotians build a stronger and safer province, and whereas representatives of the Government of Nova Scotia and Canada recently marked the official opening of the newly twinned section of Highway 101 between Mount Uniacke and Ellis House. Therefore, be it resolved that this House acknowledge the hard work and professionalism of the Department of Transportation and Public Works, the construction industry, and all stakeholders who work towards improving the transportation infrastructure of Nova Scotia for the safety and benefit of all Nova Scotians. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister responsible for health promotion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas following a brave battle with breast cancer, Nova Scotia lost an incredible breast cancer advocate in Angela Vecchio-Osmond. And whereas sadly Ms. Vecchio-Osmond left behind 2 young children whom she loved dearly, but she also left a very lasting gift to others. Her story, documented via CBC, has served as an inspirational message to all, especially those fighting the same battle. And whereas she also used her energy to push the message of the importance of living and caring. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House, through the Speaker, join me in expressing our condolences to Angela's 2 children and her parents, Elizabeth and Kenneth Osmond, and thank her through her family for the incredible gifts she has left to so many. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm reading this on behalf of the Minister of Justice. I give notice on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this Saturday, April 17th, is the Law Day 2004 in Nova Scotia, and whereas the Canadian Bar Society Association presents the annual event to raise awareness of the law that brings order to society, and whereas the public is invited to attend mock trials, a tour of the lockup, and free presentations between 10 a.m. and 2 at the Law Courts building in Halifax, therefore be it resolved that this House congratulate the Canadian Bar Association and the other participants who take part in this year's events. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'd like to introduce somebody in the House first before I introduce the bill. In the East Gallery, and I'd like to introduce Stan Surrett, the Président de la Fédération acadienne de Nouvelle-Écosse. Ladies and gentlemen, the East Gallery, Stan Surrett. Bienvenue, Stan. Mr. Speaker, I ask leave to introduce a bill, an act to establish a provincial Acadian Day, loi instituant la fête provinciale des Acadiens et Acadiennes.
The Honourable Minister responsible for Acadian Affairs begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Establish a Provincial Acadian Day.
The other party. Bill 51, entitled An Act to Establish a Provincial Acadian Day, loi instituant la fête provinciale des Acadiens et des Acadiennes.
Or the bill be read a second time in future date. That's right. Any further bills? Notice of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the auto insurance rate freeze and rollback promised by the Conservatives has proven to be imaginary for thousands of drivers who are paying higher rates. And whereas equally imaginary were the Conservative promises to dramatically reduce the number of drivers who need the costly insurance of last resort in the Facility Association. And whereas on April 15th, the Premier could only offer a report that uses imaginary costs and imaginary fees rather than the actual rates paid by drivers to defend his refusal to seriously consider another option, therefore be it resolved that the House urges the Premier and his Conservative colleagues to face the real world of skyrocketing auto insurance rates and undertake a serious, independent study of how public auto insurance would provide lower and fairer rates in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver. Passage without debate.
Here, no. Notice the table. The Honourable Member Cape Breton South.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sisters Rhonda and Lynn Crawford of Whitney Pier will receive the Tom Miller Human Rights Award for an outstanding record in human rights and community involvement, and whereas the Tom Miller Human Rights Award is awarded to residents of the Cape Breton Regional Municipality in honor of the late Tom Miller, who was Eastern Canada's first black alderman, and whereas the award is in recognition of Rhonda and Lynn's tireless work with black students and race relations. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the legislature of the province of Nova Scotia congratulate Rhonda and Lynn Crawford of Whitney Pier for receiving the Tom Miller Human Rights Award and recognize their work in the field of education and race relations. I would ask for waiver of notice, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Muscatawbet Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in October 2003, Federal Progressive Conservative leader and Nova Scotia MP Peter MacKay signed an agreement in principle with Canadian Alliance leader Stephen Harper to create the new Conservative Party of Canada. And whereas in December 2003, members of Well, Mr. Speaker, I could understand why the NDP would be concerned. Mr. Speaker, whereas in December 2003, members of both parties endorsed the agreement in principle to create a new Tory party, including over 90% of Nova Scotia Progressive Conservatives. And whereas one of the new Conservative leader, Stephen Harper's first actions as leader was to appoint Nova Scotia's own Peter MacKay as Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House applaud Stephen Harper for providing Nova Scotia with such a prominent role in the Conservative Party of Canada, Her Majesty's loyal opposition. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. Here no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas April is Cancer Awareness Month throughout Canada, and whereas during April, many volunteers contribute countless hours of their time to the Canadian Cancer Society's Familiar Daffodil campaign, and whereas this campaign enables the Canadian Cancer Society to conduct research to support cancer patients and their families, to conduct public education, and to promote healthy public policy, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature extend our sincere thanks to the many volunteers whose dedication makes this serious and important campaign possible. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 1879, the municipality of Guysborough was officially incorporated, and whereas on Saturday, April 17, 2004, will mark the 125th anniversary of the municipality's incorporation. And whereas on Saturday, the municipality will host a municipal birthday party, which will include several local celebrations, including promotional material of license plates, lapel pins, and the unveiling of a new municipal flag. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House extend their sincerest congratulations to Warden Lloyd Hines, councillors and residents of Guysborough County as they celebrate the 125th anniversary of incorporation as a county. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Rosalind Nickerson Care Fund has been established in Western Shelburne County to support cancer patients and their families, and whereas the fund was set up by Shelley Dion in memory of her mother, who lost her battle to the dreadful disease last September. And whereas this fund will assist cancer patients in the municipality of Barrington and the town of Clarks Harbour by offering financial assistance as well as spiritual and emotional support. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the contribution being established by the Rosalind Nickerson Care Fund in light of the fact that 28,000 Nova Scotians are living with cancer today and 5,000 more will be diagnosed this year. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the province of Nova Scotia has recognized individuals that have contributed to the betterment of the community through their volunteer efforts, whereas the Provincial Volunteer Awards ceremony and dinner, which was held on April 13th at the Westin Hotel in Halifax, included the presentation of a Lifetime Achievement Award to a dedicated and generous community member from the community of Eastern Passage and Cow Bay. And whereas the Lifetime Achievement Award from the province was awarded to Eva Noggle for 50 years of volunteering to the community's poor and sick, to the community spirit at St. Peter's Anglican Church and its fun in the Eastern Passage Cow Bay Summer Carnival, and for her many other generous contributions of time to local charities. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate Eva Noggle on receiving the 2004 Provincial Volunteer of the Year Award for Lifetime Achievement. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Cole Harbour's very own Sidney Crosby has been playing for the Rimouski Oceanic this season, and whereas Sidney Crosby received 6 Quebec Major Junior Hockey League awards at a banquet held on Wednesday, March 31st, whereas included in these awards were Most Valuable Player, Rookie of the Year, also receiving trophies for Personality of the Year, Top Offensive Player, Offensive Rookie of the Year, and League Scoring Champion. Therefore, it be resolved that all members of this House congratulate Sidney Crosby for his outstanding performance in his rookie year in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Mr. Speaker, I would ask waiver, please.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Eastern Shore.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Eastern Shore fiddling talent Gordon Stobie has recently released his 3rd recording of original music called the Seaforth Waltz, and whereas the CD continues Mr. Stobie's exploration of the rich and varied world of folk fiddle with influences from English and French Canadian fiddle traditions, as well as the influences of the Eastern Europe. And whereas Mr. Stobie is also a respected fiddle teacher and has published several books on fiddle music, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House join with me in congratulating Gordon Stobie on the release of his 3rd CD, Seaforth Waltz, and wish him much success in all of his musical endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on the future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas boxing has a proud tradition in this province, and whereas one of boxing's greatest legends, Rudy Plitchie, is a trainer and cornerman extraordinaire, and whereas Rudy will be inducted in the Cape Breton Sports Hall of Fame this May, therefore be it resolved that this House congratulate Rudy Plitchie for his many years of service to boxing and on his induction into the Cape Breton Sports Hall of Fame. I seek waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in the spring of 2003, Canadian Federation of Independent Business Vice President Peter O'Brien gave tacit approval to the provincial government's budget providing a 10% tax cut to Nova Scotians. And whereas this tax cut, supported by the NDP, has proved to be a colossal disaster for all Nova Scotians. And whereas the fall session of the Nova Scotia legislature realized the backroom deal on labour standards between the John Ham government and Darrell Dexter's Socialists was also a colossal disaster for Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it...
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The motion is out of order because it doesn't name members in the House. Honourable Member Colchester North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas at a public meeting 2 years ago in Tatamagouche, 4 ideas were put forth to enhance the village of Tatamagouche. And whereas one of the suggestions, the Creamery Square project, was chosen and is now well underway with the historic Tatamagouche Creamery to be the centerpiece for an assortment of museum collections, a permanent year-round farmers market, and a performing arts center. And whereas Bob Byers, president of the Creamery Square Project Committee, was presented with a $20,000 check last year by the North Shore Bavarian Society to begin the process of fundraising, which is scheduled to be completed within 3 years with the assistance of the Colchester Regional Development Agency. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House applaud the efforts of the Creamery Square Project Committee and wish them every success in this extremely worthwhile endeavor. Mr. Speaker, I request waivers.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Heritage Credit Union was inaugurated in February of 1939, and whereas the Heritage Credit Union will hold its 65th anniversary on Tuesday, April 20th, 2004, and whereas the celebration, Decades of Dedication, will honor John Cross for having served as President and CEO of the Heritage Credit Union for over 20 years. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate John Cross for his dedication and commitment to the credit union movement, and that he be commended for his efforts to enhance the successful profile of the Heritage Credit Union in the community and throughout the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver, passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Trial number 2. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in the spring of 2003, Canadian Federation of Independent Business Vice President Peter O'Brien gave tacit approval to the provincial government's budget providing a 10% tax cut to Nova Scotians. And whereas this tax cut, supported by the NDP, has proved to be a colossal disaster for all Nova Scotians. And whereas in the fall session of the Nova Scotia Legislature, there was a realization of a backroom deal on labour standards between the Conservative government and the Nova Scotia Socialists that was also a colossal disaster for Nova Scotia.
Order, please.
Therefore,
order, please. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
The honourable member is imputing motives, and I believe that resolution is out of order.
Order, please. I'll order. Pardon me? Well, it's the opinion of the Speaker that'll matter, but I'd like to take the, I'd like to have a copy of the resolution first, and then I'll decide whether it's proper or not. The Honourable Member of Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each year the Tourism Association of Nova Scotia recognizes Nova Scotians who go beyond the call of duty in assisting visitors to this province with its annual Pineapple Awards. And whereas recently Geraldine and Orville Browning, owners of Browning's Bed and Breakfast in Gibson Woods, were honoured with the Pineapple Award, and whereas Orville and Geraldine Browning consistently go out of their way to make visitors feel at home, giving of their time and energy, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating Geraldine and Orville Browning on receiving the Tourism Award of Nova Scotia, the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia's Pineapple Award, for their efforts that exhibit the generosity for which Nova Scotians are famous. I request waiver.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the forest provides Nova Scotians with a renewable resource that has always been a vital part of our economy, and whereas sustainable forestry practices will ensure that Nova Scotia's forest industry will remain as a preeminent part of the economy. Whereas in December 2003, Elmsdale Lumber received the Nova Forest Alliance Merit Award for its outstanding efforts in sustainable forestry management, and the Forest Products Association of Nova Scotia Principles of Good Forestry Certificate for its compliance with FPANS Forest Stewardship Principles. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the owner, management staff, and crew at Elmsdale Lumber for their awards, recognizing their efforts to make sustainability in the forest industry a reality, and I request waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Order, please. I did review the resolution by the Honourable Member for Cape Breton West, and I ruled that it is in order. And normally only allowed 2, but this is your 3rd chance. But hopefully this will be allowed. So the Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
works in baseball, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in the spring of 2003, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business Vice President Peter O'Brien gave tacit approval to the provincial government's budget providing a 10% tax cut to Nova Scotians. And whereas this tax cut, supported by the NDP, has proved to be a colossal disaster for all Nova Scotians. And whereas in the fall session of the Nova Scotia Legislature realized a reported backroom deal on labour standards between the Conservative government and the Nova Scotia Socialists, which also is a colossal disaster for all Nova Scotians. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House be mindful that the left is not the right is not the left, and that liberalism is neither right or left, but central to Nova Scotia, which is a proven fact by its governance in Nova Scotia for 75% of the last 250 years. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for a waiver of notice and pass it.
Agreed. Here no. Notice table. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Be it from me to question your ruling, Mr. Speaker, but I still. But I do find it offensive when people start attributing backroom deals to members that or to people who are not even in this chamber to respond.
Tell us about the sponsorship scandal. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on December 27, 2003, Sackville High School graduates from the class of '93 celebrated their 10-year reunion, and whereas this happy post-Christmas event took place at the Sackville Kinsman Centre, and whereas graduates of Sackville High's class of '93 are making a positive difference here at home and around the world. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating Sackville High's class of 1993, particularly reunion organizers Debbie Kavanagh and Kim Pickup, for their many successes and achievements. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas many schools in Nova Scotia have no other choice but to fundraise to provide much-needed equipment, books, and various other items for their students. And whereas Ellenvale Junior High School in Dartmouth East is one of the many schools that do an outstanding job at fundraising for their school. And whereas this weekend, on Saturday, April the 17th, Ellenvale Junior High School will hold its annual auction, which usually raises approximately $13,000 through a huge effort by the school staff, students, parents, and the surrounding community. Therefore, be it resolved that this government wish Ellenvale Junior High a very successful auction this Saturday from 1 until 5 p.m. at Doolittle's in Dartmouth East. And I request waiver and passage without debate.
Waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 4th Annual Foresters Children's Miracle Network Radiothon Awards Conference recently took place to recognize the outstanding contribution made by radio stations from across North America in raising needed funds and awareness for children's hospitals. And whereas C100 FM radio was the only radio station out of 230 stations to be recognized with 2 awards. The first award was for the Best Change Bandit promotion, while the second was for the Best Family Story, featuring Kyle McKay and his courageous battle against cancer. And whereas the tremendous success of the annual Radiothon held by C100 is a testament to the importance of these events, the monies raised go a long way to improve the lives of children who are in the need of services. Therefore, be it resolved, each member of this legislature congratulate C100 for this recognition and acknowledge their valuable contribution to the IWK Health Centre Foundation. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Tadmagush Daycare, which has now been open for 6 months under the capable leadership of owner Krista Briggs, is offering eligible North Shore parents a structured preschool schedule for their children, and whereas being a parent and an early childhood development educator, Briggs saw the need for a complete day structured program to suit the needs of working parents. And whereas the daycare situated in the upper portion of the North Shore Recreation Center offers a host of activities for up to 18 preschoolers. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly compliment owner Krista Briggs for her ingenuity and entrepreneurship in establishing a much-needed service for parents along the North Shore of Colchester County. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice.
Waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Shabakdale.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas recent attacks on a Jewish school in Montreal and on Jewish homes in Ontario have renewed concerns about anti-Semitism. And whereas in recent years, mosques, synagogues, and other centres of religious faith have been attacked by those who misguidedly judge others on the basis of their creed. And whereas freedom of religion must be vigorously defended so that no resident of our country need fear persecution or attack simply because of their religious beliefs. Therefore, be it resolved that on the eve of Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom HaShoah, this House affirms its support for the free and open practice of religious belief, free from discrimination and safe from attack, lest religious bigotry regain a foothold or any degree of acceptance in Canadian society. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Eastern Shore Mariners annual hockey tournament was started over 25 years ago, whereas this tournament was held in March 2004, it has expanded from old-timers to include gents recreational as well as ladies division. And whereas this tournament hosted over 40 teams from the Atlantic provinces during the 4 days of the tournament, and funds raised have been donated to the local rink and the Twin Oaks Hospital, as well as many other charities over the past 25 years. Therefore, it be resolved that members of this House extend congratulations to the Eastern Shore Mariners and their members for the past 25 years, in particular the 6 original team members that still play, and would ask waiver.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas baseball has a rich tradition in the town of Clacks Harbour, and whereas the Clacks Harbour and Area Minor Baseball Association is one of the largest minor ball associations in Nova Scotia, and whereas behind the efforts of Mayor Lee Stoddart, the town of Clacks Harbour has decided to begin promoting itself as the home of baseball in Shelburne County. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly commend the Mayor, Council, and residents of Clacks Harbour for their civic pride and continued interest in the great game of baseball. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the months following childbirth are well known to dispose new mothers to depression, sometimes with dire consequences for infant development, health, and emotional well-being. And whereas the support of trained companions or doulas before, during, and after childbirth significantly reduces the risk of depression and increases the rate of nursing by approximately 150% from the general average in the population. And whereas the Single Parent Centre in Spryfield has been training and coordinating the services of volunteer doulas and is launching the postpartum doula program today at the very same time it has lost funding from the Capital District Health Board. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate the Single Parent Centre on its continued work on the postpartum doula program and ensure that future funding recognizes the enormous contribution of this program to promoting the health of mothers, infants, and their families. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Digby's very own Colin Holliday has been wrestling for the Digby Regional High School, whereas on March the 26th he entered the 50-kilogram division at the provincial championship held in Cole Harbour, and whereas Colin came away with a second provincial championship in that very division by winning all 3 of his matches. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Colin Holliday. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Eastern Shore.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas we are fortunate in this province to have many bright young people who will make a positive contribution to this province. And whereas on March 17th, I had the privilege to be interviewed by one such person, her name Jessica Romo, a grade 6 student, as a part of a school assignment. And whereas Miss Romo, an intelligent young woman who has expressed an interest in becoming a politician when she grows up. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in extending our best wishes to Ms. Jessica Romo and wish her much success as she follows her dream of becoming a politician. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, and of course, Mr. Speaker, I've added which party should be attached to. Thank you.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas yesterday in New Brunswick, a political party released a transcript of a recent push poll commissioned by the Insurance Bureau of Canada and conducted by Polara Research. And whereas the leader of that political party warned the public against believing the results of the poll, which seemed clearly designed to push respondents towards expressing an opinion against public auto insurance. And whereas that leader of that political party, which participated in the all-party report on public auto insurance, repeated that leader's previously expressed support for a public auto insurance system, therefore be it resolved that this House thank New Brunswick Liberal leader Sean Graham for bringing the Insurance Bureau of Canada's push poll to the public's attention and invites Mr. Graham to Nova Scotia for urgent consultations with the Nova Scotia Liberal Party. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice.
Waiver. Here or no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future date I will move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Saturday, April 17, 2004 will mark the 125th anniversary of the incorporation for the municipality of Richmond. Whereas celebrations for the 125th anniversary included a New Year's levy, a calendar sent to all homes in the county depicting the 10 municipal districts, and a proposed history project chronicling the county's past. Whereas Richmond County has undergone many changes over the years, yet has persevered due to the resiliency of its residents. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House extend their congratulations to Warden Gail Johnson, councillors, and the residents of Richmond County as they celebrate their 125th anniversary of incorporation as a county. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia Business Inc. and ACOA have organized trade missions aimed at increasing trade opportunities with the United States of America to benefit the Nova Scotia economy. And whereas the Sale Off has been repairing and manufacturing quality sales in Second Peninsula, Lunenburg County for more than 80 years. And whereas the Sale Off, owned and operated by Michelle Stevens, has been recognized for its quality work and is one of 5 Nova Scotia companies chosen to participate in a Team Canada trade mission to Washington later this month. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Michelle Stevens and the Sale Off on being chosen as one of the companies to represent Nova Scotia in the upcoming trade mission and wish her a successful trip. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia portion of the Polaris 2004 International WOW, that's Way Out Women, snowmobile and relay in support of the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation was a great success. And whereas this national and international event raises awareness and funding for this important cause, as well as encouraging more women to be involved in the great wintertime activity of snowmobiling. And whereas Pictou County, the members of the Dalhousie Mountain Snowmobile Club fully supported and participated in this WOW Relay fundraiser, Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Karen Cock of Sylvester Pictou County, Kenda Weiland of Southern Lake Colchester County, and Betty Boudreau of Cheticamp Cape Breton for participating in this international relay and helping to raise funds for the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contraminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas music as an art form elevates the lives of those who experience it while transcending the entire range of expression and community that is vital to the cultural enrichment of all societies, and whereas in May 2004, the Dartmouth Choral Society will launch its year-long 50th anniversary celebration, a significant milestone for this longest continuous community choir in Nova Scotia. And whereas the Dartmouth Choral Society's 90 Voices four-part choir will launch its celebration in 2 performances in Dartmouth in May 2004. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this host congratulate choir director Sean Wynott and accompanist Pam Burton, and indeed all members of the Dartmouth Choral Society on the occasion of their 50th anniversary, and wish them all the best in the times ahead. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contraminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Sunday, March 28, 2004, the community of Bedford recognized the hard work and dedication of its volunteers at a special recognition dinner, and whereas this year award was presented to Ken Dodsworth, Ken being an individual who has risen above and beyond the norm and is being recognized by the community. Whereas this event gives the opportunity for the community of Bedford to recognize and applaud the hard work of all individuals that have given their time and dedication to improve their community. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Ken Dodsworth for his continued support to his community and for all those volunteers of the community who we so greatly appreciate. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contraminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Girl Guides of Canada, the largest organization for girls and women in Canada, and the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts are part of a network of international, non-governmental organizations, all of which share similar aims and objectives. And whereas guiding helps young girls and women connect with their community and with the wider world through varied, imaginative, and innovative activity choices, that girls are encouraged to reach their potential, be independent, confident, and caring. And whereas Stephanie McNeil and Joan Smith of Dartmouth, representing Girl Guides of Canada, attended the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts conference held recently in Santiago, Chile, for delegates from 20 countries. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Stephanie McNeil and Joan Smith on the honour of representing Canada at the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts conference held recently in Chile. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contraminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Liberal members from Cape Breton West, Annapolis, and Kings West ably represent the Liberal caucus on the Community Services Committee, whereas that committee heard from Nova Scotia Transition House workers in Nova Scotia on February 12, 2004, and at that meeting the Liberal members proposed that a day-long forum be held with Transition House workers and other concerned groups and organizations in order that members might have an opportunity to better understand the issue of family violence in Nova Scotia. Whereas the Community Services Committee announced yesterday that a one-day forum on family violence will be held on Thursday, June 24 in the Red Chamber. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House congratulate the members of the Community Services Committee for taking this important step in improving our understanding of and hopefully in turn our response to the issue of family violence in Nova Scotia. I'd ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contraminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Skip Jill Mauser, 3rd Paige Maddie, second Liz Comstock, and lead Chloe Comstock won the Nova Scotia Junior Women's Curling Championship at the Liverpool Curling Club in January 2004. And whereas the following month the Nova Scotia Junior Women's Curling Champions handily defeated a strong team from Quebec to win the 2004 Canadian Junior Women's Curling Championships in Victoria, British Columbia. And whereas this Nova Scotia team represented Canada at the 2004 World Junior Curling Championships in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, placing second to a powerful team from Norway, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House applaud the achievements of Jill Mauser, Paige Matty, Liz Comstock, Chloe Comstock, winners of the World Junior Championship silver medal. Mr. Speaker, I ask waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas last September, Hurricane Juan left a path of destruction in uprooting trees, knocking down power lines, and destroying personal property, and whereas many individuals placed themselves in harm's way by assisting in the initial cleanup, and whereas in Dartmouth North, Scott Banfield was one of those individuals who directed traffic, cut trees, moved debris from the power lines, and assisted fire and rescue services. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature commends Scott Banfield for his unselfish commitment to public safety. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize Mr. Bob Venus. He's in your gallery there, Mr. Speaker. He's from Dartmouth East, Mr. Speaker, and Bob is here today. He's an advocate for other citizens that are dealing with the issue of the continuing cuts to home care in Nova Scotia. And I'd like everyone to wish Bob all the best in his future endeavors. Warm welcome. Thank you.
Certainly welcome Bob to the gallery today and hope he enjoys the proceedings. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try something a little more user-friendly since it's a tough audience this morning. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Saturday, March 20th, 2004, Stephen Harper was elected leader of the newly minted Conservative Party of Canada. And whereas the member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley, a supporter of Stephen Harper, should be particularly elated. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Stephen Harper on his electoral success. I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
For waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Rosedale Home for Special Care was built in 1984 by the residents of the New Germany area who recognized the need for such a service. And whereas the facility currently cares for 29 residents and employs 50 people. Whereas the Rosedale Home for Special Care is celebrating 20 years of providing quality service to the people of Lunenburg County and the province. Therefore, it be resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Rosedale Home for Special Care on its 20th anniversary and thank them for the excellent assistance they have provided over the years to our senior citizens. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jamie Crane of South Bar and Scott Gillard of Sydney ran in the recent University College of Cape Breton Student Union election. And whereas Jamie Crane and her running mate, Scott Gillard, won the recent election at UCCB. And whereas Jamie Crane is now the president and Scott Gillard is the vice president of the UCCB Student Union. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this Legislative Assembly recognize and congratulate Jamie Crane and Scott Gillard on their great victory and wish them well during their tenure as President and Vice President of the University College of Cape Breton. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April is the Canadian Cancer Society's Daffodil Month, and whereas the Canadian Cancer Society is a national organization dedicated to eradicating cancer and helping those who are living with cancer and their families. And whereas the Canadian Cancer Society has led the way in funding for research, promoting health, and providing information on cancer to the public, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House should add their support to this national campaign to eliminate cancer. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas hundreds of veterans from our province and across Canada have been laid to rest without proper grave markers, and whereas Ralph Pride, nephew of World War II veteran John Earl Gale, has fought hard for many years to bring the awareness to the underfunded Last Post Fund, and whereas this treatment of veterans, often after their passing, is disrespectful and should come to an end, therefore be it resolved that the members of this Legislative Assembly continue to speak up and support our veterans and their family, especially in their passing, to ensure all Nova Scotians and Canadians remember the sacrifice veterans made. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jamie Corlett, the son of Helen and Phil Corlett, has been awarded the Junior Shodan, it's the first-degree black belt in the Yorkishan Aikido martial arts program, whereas this 14-year-old grade 9 Ridgecliffe Middle School student is the first to receive the award in Eastern Canada, whereas Jamie has dedicated over 6 years of training to reach this achievement. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate Jamie Corlett on this accomplishment with best wishes in his future endeavours. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
For waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day, government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 37, the adjourned debate on the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Accord Act?
Bill number 37. The honourable member for Dartmouth East has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just would like to summarize some of the things I spoke about before we adjourned last evening. The number one issue I was trying to make was that there are safety concerns out there, especially transportation to and from the rigs. And this is all due to the weather reporting on the rigs and coordinating the weather that's reported at the time on the rig and on shore at the same time. So, Mr. Speaker, I have concerns that the energy sector is moving forward at a very fast pace, and we've seen that in a lot of the documents that have been coming forward from that department. And so that's one of the concerns that someone has addressed to me personally, and I'd just like to make sure that somebody's listening to those concerns and that they're acted upon. And I would just, really like to hear back if somebody can get back to me on that issue, whether it's an issue that they've heard about or they're doing something about it. So in closing, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to say that it is a very important issue. Offshore exploration is only going to expand by the looks of what's going on, and I just want to make sure that those issues are addressed. Thank you.
Order, please. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to speak to the bill somewhat briefly, Bill number 37, because I'm going to wait till the bill goes to law amendments and then comes back to see what the presenters have to say with the bill, particularly around occupational health and public safety. Mr. Speaker, it's important to recognize that, in fact, when the new frontier of offshore oil came to Nova Scotia, it came, and I believe my colleague from Halifax, Shabukto, actually mentioned that it came around about sometime in 1982 was really when the exploration really started in the offshore of Nova Scotia. That was at the very same time, Mr. Speaker, when there was a downturn in the fishing industry, and many people who were seafarers and earned a living off the ocean, in fact, had to readjust or change their way of seeking employment. And many of those people went to training programs that were offered to enable them to take employment opportunities in the offshore. Many of those individuals went through training programs such as WEMIS training programs, offshore safety programs that were sponsored by community colleges or by private industry programs. And many of those individuals, in fact, made sure, Mr. Speaker, that they were protected as individuals and making sure that their own individual public safety was paramount for them. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, for most part, it was a requirement of employment that the individual employees who wanted to work in the offshore were those individual employees who had to participate in these kind of training programs. Those employees who knew that the safety gear that was required was going to be needed, and the safety gear that was necessary was going to be the appropriate safety gear. So the individual employees, for the most part, Mr. Speaker, looked after themselves and made sure that their safety was inconsistent with what the employer had wanted. Unfortunately, the employer did not implement the occupational health and safety programs that were required for individuals working in the offshore. Now, you've got to remember, Mr. Speaker, that the offshore is quite a distance from land, and many people whom, in fact, lived in fishing vessels and so on realize the perils of the employment in that isolated area. And they also recognize that there was a need for public safety, and many of the individuals, as my colleague from Timberley Prospect had pointed out, had spoken about the particular dangers with respect to the lack of public health and safety in that very new frontier that was coming to the province. I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, that I've known a number of individuals whom, in fact, not necessarily worked totally upon the oil rigs themselves, but were, in fact, worked with companies that were suppliers to the oil rigs. And those individuals worked in a very precarious situation because they, in fact, Mr. Speaker, were on the supply vessels who delivered the supplies to the oil rigs, and in fact had to make sure that those supplies were placed on the oil rigs, and the individuals often had to go up and down those oil rigs and put their own safety in peril. I want to tell you that, you know, I recall the Ocean Ranger and the serious, I should say the most unfortunate situation with respect to the going down of the Ocean Ranger. And it happened to go down where every single life, I believe at that particular time, was lost. I don't know if, in fact, Mr. Speaker, public health and safety would have been able to address an issue whereas a huge storm comes up and everybody is unprepared and unable to address such a disaster. But I do know that if things were in place, that there could have been safety measures to, in fact, help address and assess that. You know, I've often wondered, you know, the individuals who've decided to take this on as a career and the individuals who recognize that they're out there to sea, I believe, for some 2 weeks on and some 2 weeks off, and they're out there in this particular environment, precarious and left to the perils of the sea and the ocean. And I think that it's important that, in fact, when they are left to those perils, that governments not argue about whose jurisdiction and whose right it is to provide the public health and safety to those individuals, but governments at all levels who are responsible and who encourage offshore development in this particular industry. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for us to recognize and to know that governments at all levels should pull together, and when they're crafting these agreements and putting these agreements into place, that in fact these agreements also address the issues with respect to the employment of public health and safety. It's one thing to draft offshore agreements, and many of us will know that not the crafting of this offshore agreement does not necessarily benefit all Nova Scotians. And I don't want to sway from the point of occupational health and safety, but we know that Nova Scotians are not getting the true value of that resource off their coastline. And the value and the revenue that's coming through there should be much greater to Nova Scotians. And particularly if Nova Scotians are going to put themselves, who are employed in that industry, at peril. And I do know that this present government, unlike the past government, will certainly look at contractual agreements or agreements with respect to developments in the offshore, and a much better, I should say, manner in which the previous government has addressed these, and make sure that Nova Scotians will benefit from such agreements. And also, Mr. Speaker, I would want to say to you that, as I've said, that I wanted to speak just briefly on this because I believe that it's important to go to law amendments, to listen to the presenters at law amendments, and then to come back and give bills a thorough discussion and a thorough debate after we know what has been said at law amendments. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that although this is 5 years and the death of Mr. Sean Hatcher and the loss of his life and the suffering of that family some 5 years ago was instrumental, hopefully, in bringing this legislation forward, and it is some 5 years later, that it's better late than never, and that, in fact, it's on the floor, and hopefully we will look at what comes from law amendments. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity.
The honourable member for Hants East. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak on Bill 37, and I will probably speak fairly briefly, compared to some of my colleagues. But there's a few things that I have some concerns about, I guess. Mr. Speaker, I never worked in the offshore, and I certainly have friends who've worked in the oil patch in Alberta, and but really for me, I don't have a lot of personal knowledge of the particular job types in the offshore. Only what I've seen on promotional commercials on television, etc. But, Mr. Speaker, I do have some experience in working at jobs that are fairly dangerous lines of work. And I grew up on a small farm, and certainly am familiar with cutter bars and pitchforks and PTO shafts on tractors and all of these things which have been known to either maim or kill people. I worked for 3 years in the woods using a power saw, and Mr. Speaker, if you're from rural Nova Scotia, you certainly would have heard of members in your community probably in the past who were injured, if not killed, felling trees. And Mr. Speaker, I guess I want to say that I see this as a good move for the government to bring in this legislation, and but it doesn't, for me, complete the whole picture. The fact that the government recognizes this need that workers in the offshore should have some protection, the same as workers onshore, is a very positive move. I wish that they had moved faster in this regard, but I won't condemn them for that. But I think what we tend to lose sight of, Mr. Speaker, is that when we get up in the morning and go to work, we don't actually expect that we won't come home in the evening. And the thing that quite often, when we do a job, and we do it every day, and we do it to the point that our skill level makes it routine. In other words, the dangers that we face as part of our job become somewhat second nature to us because we haven't really experienced any close shave, in regard to that danger. Now, it only takes one or two of those experiences, and hopefully they would be close shaves. They would be things that would give us a wake-up call that we have to change what we do personally and how we do our job, or that there has to be a change in the mindset with our employer or whoever, that the way this job is carried out by the workers has a tendency to lead us down a road that the routine nature of it, if we allow that to occur, is going to lead us into trouble. So there has to be things that offset or take us down a different path away from that danger. And I'm hoping that this legislation will help do that. And because, Mr. Speaker, the one thing we can't escape is our humanity. And the fact that, the later part of the day, that we're more tired than we are at the start of the day, we tend to allow things to slip, and, and we run the risk of putting ourselves in increasing danger. And, Mr. Speaker, we all have separate dreams and aspirations that we hope to achieve when we go to work. In other words, we have things that we want to do for our families and for ourselves, that we see our job as the important component in achieving those dreams, that financial reward that will allow us to do that thing that we want to do after the 8-hour day or the 12-hour day, and that we regard most important to our families. And for most of us, it isn't always the job that is the reason for our living. It's the people closest to us that is the reason for our living. And it seems so unfair to put people in a situation whereby the dangers of their work are such that they risk the people closest to them or their own lives in trying to accomplish those dreams. And I worry very much that, Mr. Speaker, that we're willing to be satisfied with a certain statistic. In other words, if we say the number of accidents is below a certain percentage, the number of deaths is below a certain percentage, that somehow that's fine. That we've picked a number that we're willing to settle on that seems to make us think that's okay. Well, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, it's not. I do have a few people close to me, my children in particular. My son is 17. He's getting to an age where I would expect that he'd be entering the workforce either as a summer job or whatever. And I remember probably 3 years ago, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, my colleague from Dartmouth Coal Harbour, I think he raised this point. But I remember seeing I think it was the front page of the Chronicle Herald, and it was around the death of a young man. I think he was probably 18. He had started a summer job. I forget just exactly what the job was, but it had a level of danger to it, and because of his inexperience, actually, and the first day on the job, he was in a situation which took his life. And I think that if my memory is right, there were about 12 or 13 deaths of young people at that time. And I often think about myself, actually, as a 16, 17, 18, working around on summer jobs, and not always when you went to work in the morning that some of the older people there, more experienced, they kind of, if you were the new kid there, that you were given very little in far as training, or here's what you have to look out for, or be careful, and you were kind of had to learn on your feet. And sometime, Mr. Speaker, that was not a good situation. So I looked through the bill briefly, Mr. Speaker. I have a concern, although as much as I see this as a good step, I'm not sure that from what I've seen is the intent, Mr. Speaker, of the government to follow through in a way that actually makes this a workable document, Now, maybe one of the members opposite, and I see the government House leader listening intently as he always does when I speak. I appreciate that very much. Yes, the Hants County connection. But Mr. Speaker, I don't see anything in this bill, and it may be there, which indicates the resources that the government's willing to put to this. Because what we're doing, we're allowing actually present legislation around occupational health and safety really to apply to the offshore. That's really what's going to happen here. But I'm wondering if it's going to be present resources that are onshore resources that are somehow going to be spread thinner to apply to the offshore. And I would like to have the assurance from the government that actually this means that they're going to allocate resources to see that there are enough inspectors, et cetera, to do this. Now, I noticed that it does mention the designation of a chief safety officer and another person who is the chief conservation officer. And so that's two people. I'm certainly hoping that this means that there's going to be an awful lot more than two people doing the inspections to ensure that what the intent in this legislation is actually will be carried out in the field to ensure that people are protected. And that, to me, is the bottom line. This may seem to be a nice exercise, but if it's really not going to make a change in the lives of the people who get up in the morning and go to work in the offshore, to ensure that to the best ability of all of us, that we can strive to see that there are no deaths or no injuries to those people in the offshore, so that they actually can get home and fulfill their dreams with the people they care about. So, Mr. Speaker, with those comments, I look forward to see the bill move forward and see what the public may say in law amendments. And with that, I'll relinquish the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, like the member from Hants East, will just make a few brief comments on this bill. I, too, have not worked offshore on the rigs or in vessels, but many of my colleagues and friends have chosen to venture out offshore and work in those conditions. The Minister of Environment and Labour stated yesterday in his opening remarks that they need to have at least the same regulations offshore as we do have here onshore, and I agree with that. But I think we need to take a step further and really make sure that there's strong legislation that is provided for workers that are working offshore due to the dangerous and remote environment that they find themselves in when they go offshore. The people that choose to work offshore take a substantial risk working 200, 300, 400 miles off the shore of Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, wherever it is. And they are well compensated when they go out there, and that's one of the drawing features for these people to go out there and work. But I don't think they need to forfeit safety and a healthy environment because of a higher wage. And I think through legislation we really need to protect that and protect their rights as workers, especially Nova Scotians, even though there's many people from other provinces that are working offshore. Ensure that they have protections and they have the ability to make recommendations or changes in their work environment without the fear of potentially losing their jobs or maybe not getting that next contract. As the member from Timberleaf Prospect stated yesterday, he's heard from many members that have worked outside offshore and fear for any retribution that may come to them if they speak up on some of the issues that they may find out there. They do take serious safety issues and some of the training when they do get hired on offshore, like the training they take care of over at Survival Systems in Dartmouth. At times you can see many of the workers or potential workers for offshore bobbing out offshore here in survival suits and learning emergency responses to, say, when the helicopter, if a helicopter goes down in the water. But I think we need to look at ensuring that their environment, where once they get there, is a safe and a healthy place for them to make a living. Many of my colleagues and healthcare professionals that have chose to work offshore, men and women, nurses, paramedics, choose to go out and I guess are somewhat safety officers when they go out there on top of the job of ensuring safety or treating patients out there. There's an increased stress put upon them when they do take those jobs out there because of the remoteness of where they're working. Myself, as a healthcare provider here in Nova Scotia, I've had the luxury of having assistance if I need within 20 minutes. Just get on your radio as yourself, Mr. Speaker, in your previous occupation. If you need assistance, you just call, and usually there's someone that can come and help. Also, we're relatively close to hospitals where the healthcare providers that go offshore are out on a limb. At times, it's hours before they can get any assistance, and they have limited resources out there. The stress that they go through determining their next step of action when there is an emergency or in the treatment of a worker. Should they call the helicopter in at a large expense to the company to medevac them to the nearest hospital, or should they try to treat them offshore? So it's a stressful environment at the least, where I think we need to really bring in this legislation that helps them out and it makes it less stressful for them. We need to take a proactive role in bringing legislation in, not a reactive role. Last evening, someone was speaking to me and asking me what was happening in the legislature, and I had mentioned this bill, and he wondered why does it take a tragedy for government to act upon to bring in legislation like this, and I have to agree with him. It seems every time there's tragedy on all levels of government, when there's a tragedy, it seems like we react after the fact. And I think we need to start looking at legislation to bring forward, to take a proactive role in maybe limiting tragedies that happen for workers in our province and hopefully throughout Canada, and take a leadership role. And as an elected official from Sackville, and hopefully in the next months or the months ahead of me and the years, if the member or the residents of Sackville permit me to represent them, that I'll bring legislation in that hopefully one day will prevent a tragedy like this. And I think it's a role of any elected official to look at it that way and take a proactive approach to legislation and to prevent this. 5 years, a short 5 years ago, Sean Hatcher lost his life, the young Newfoundlander who was working offshore, had a young family. To many of us, 5 years isn't that long, but to his young kids, 5 years is a lifetime. And I don't think we can put a price on a life, and I think we need to really make sure that this legislation is strong and gives the workers on offshore rigs and vessels the opportunity to make suggestions and remarks on how to change their environment to make it safer for them, and maybe put their families at ease a little bit when they do leave. These men and women go out for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, some of them up to 5 weeks at a time, and their families do sit at home and go through some sleepless nights wondering what's going on, especially with the weather conditions that happens off our coast. And it's my hope that with this going to law amendments that we can hear from the presenters and hopefully make some recommendations. They can make some recommendations to make this a strong piece of legislation. So with that, I look forward to the comments in law amendment and further debate on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. If I recognize the Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour, be closed debate on Bill number 37, the Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the members opposite for all their comments and debate. There certainly was a lot of discussion. I believe that's important for this bill. It's important to me. It's important to the government. I know it's important to everybody in this legislature that we get good legislation through to protect people in the offshore, the same as we protect people who are onshore. So I would like to close debate at this point in time.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 37. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 37, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1987, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation, Nova Scotia Act.
Or this bill will be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill 40, the Assessment Act?
Bill number 40, the Assessment Act. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased today to open debate on second reading of Bill number 40, an act to amend the Assessment Act. Mr. Speaker, this bill would protect property owners by imposing a cap on the amount of annual assessment increases that can be taxed by municipalities. Like every province and state in North America, Nova Scotia uses the market value approach to setting property assessment. The local real estate market plays a substantial role in determining the market value of one's property. In certain parts of Nova Scotia, hot real estate markets have resulted in some property owners experiencing significant increases in their property assessment. Such an increase means that a corresponding increase in property tax bill later in the year. When we introduced this bill, our intention was to establish a base year for assessment purposes and, following consultation with the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, establish a cap on future increases in taxable assessments. Mr. Speaker, we have been discussing with the UNSM throughout the fall and the winter on this issue, and I had hoped to have had this matter resolved or settled by now. Unfortunately, that is not the case. In the absence of an agreement with the UNSM, we have no choice but to continue with this bill. Our first priority is to still work with the UNSM on a solution that achieves our objectives. We will continue those talks and discussions while we work through the legislative process. Mr. Speaker, allow me to explain how the solution offered in this bill will work. Assume a property is assessed at $100,000. If the market value of that property increased to $150,000 the following year, mainly because of local market, and there were no improvements to the property owner could expect to receive a tax bill from the municipality based on assessed value times tax rate. If the rate hadn't changed from one year to the next, that property owner would be facing a 50% increase in municipal property taxes. Mr. Speaker, under our plan, in this example, the assessed value of the property would remain at $150,000, but the municipality would not tax the full 50% assessment increase. There would be a cap that would determine the property owner's taxable assessment increase. This bill would apply only to residential and resource properties who are residents of Nova Scotia and would allow property to be transferred within families without affecting the base year. If the property is sold outside the family, the year of the sale would become the new base year for assessment purposes. Municipalities would not lose any revenue, but the amount of tax increase from certain individual properties would be impacted by a ceiling. Such a limit on increased taxable assessment cannot in any way be characterized as losing revenue. I take the UNSM at its word when it tells me that it wants to resolve this problem. We have been having on and off discussions with the UNSM for more than 2 years on this issue. What is most important to Nova Scotians is that we finally fix this problem for them. I look forward to debate from all members of the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member, order please. The honourable member Cape Breton Centre on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the East Gallery today we have members of the NSGEU's Occupational Health and Safety Committee, and they are Chairperson Carol Gadet, Mark Burgess, Robert Hughes, Donald Angel, Regina Martin, James Outhouse, John Triggs, Lois Ward, and they're accompanied by Debbie Wright, NSGEU Occupational Health and Safety Officer. Mr. Speaker, I wish the members of the House to give them a warm welcome to their proceedings today.
Certainly welcome the guests to the gallery today and hope they enjoy the proceedings. The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I especially welcome the opportunity to speak to Bill 40 today because this is one of the really central issues that have come to the House. This is a long-standing and, as Minister Barnett has pointed out, almost intractable problem. Nova Scotians are having a great deal of difficulty paying the bills on the houses in which they live, the properties which they have owned. The ways we're setting about resolving it can only show that this is a very, very messy issue. We know the phenomenon. In my riding alone of Halifax Atlantic, I have, in areas without city water, public transit, snow plowing, or paving offered by the province or the city, assessments have doubled in some cases. Assessments have doubled in some cases over the course of the last 3 years. In HRM alone, assessments are up 8% overall, but only 2.8% of that increase is actually due to new construction. At Purcell's Cove and Ketch Harbour, Sambro, Pennant, and the inland rural areas as well, the natural beauty and the extraordinary desirability of living in this area has come to the attention of many, and the fair market value system of determining property assessments means that people are having great difficulties paying these taxes. Why is it happening? There are a lot of old jokes and truisms in the real estate market. Talk about location, location, location. And the other one, that land's the best investment because they don't make it anymore. It's absolutely true. Location. Nova Scotia is a wonderful place to live. Its municipalities are wonderful places to live. We know it, and other people know it. I may have brought the story before, my own experience, which is that when I was a child, we went to live in a house which was had been empty for 3 or 4 years. That house is in the city of Halifax, and it's worth much more than it was in that day and age because it's not any longer unreachable. Nothing about the house has changed, but the surroundings have, and the values of lands around. Land is the best investment. It's a non-renewable resource. There are a lot of non-renewable resources that we depend on, and we don't allow them to be sold freely. Air and water, and land is, in fact, our source of shelter. Property tax is different from other things. You pay to buy the land, and then you pay to keep on owning it. This isn't about paying for services, and it's not rental. This is just plain an unlimited, potentially incessant increase. When personal property is owned, part of the assessment goes to the municipality to deliver services. And the other way that the municipalities deliver services is through assessments on commercial tax basis. And we've had recent examples of the difficulties of the assessment system. The balance between commercial and residential is not fixed, and there are big problems, as we've noticed in the recent difficulties with Imperial Oil. Bill 40 approaches the problem by saying that we will protect certain classes of people owning certain classes of land, ordinarily resident in Nova Scotia. There's a lot of trouble with that. Rules are changing fast, and they're changing constantly, and the sky is the limit. So, who do we protect? Is it the ordinarily resident, or is it the person who, or is it, in fact, any particular class of people? Should we perhaps be looking at land? The largest problem that I can see with this bill is that regulation really is procrastination. The regulations are going to define who has got to prove that they are in fact ordinarily resident. It's dependent on keeping a very, very cautious eye on changes to the regulations to see whether or not one has to prove that ordinary residence. And a failure to prove that ordinary residence exempts the land from the capping provisions. The base year concept is certainly a useful one. It speaks to the long-standing ownership question. But the percentage limit is what? And as Minister Barnett as the Minister has pointed out, there is a big difficulty in deciding what these percentages may be. And the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities is still, the jury is out on what it should be. So in closing, I would really have to say that we have a huge problem in the lack of predictability, which is driving people off the land that they have counted on owning. The process is unfair. The process of assessment appeals is notoriously unfair. There are a variety of possible solutions, and I can only say that there's an enormous amount of room for debate on this bill. Thank you very much.
The member from Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm glad to see the government bring this bill forward, a bill many would say was a long time coming. The bill is before us today because of the outcry of Nova Scotia landowners, especially those who have lived their lives on the coast of our great province. These individuals have the great fortune of living, working, and raising a family on some of the nicest real estate in the world. And they are being forced out of their homes, Madam Speaker, forced out because of drastic increases in the value of properties in their communities. These prices reflect the market value mainly of vacation property for wealthy visitors. These prices did not reflect a lifetime spent in the family farmhouse or homestead. The bill reflects and affects two groups directly. The first group, those I've just mentioned, long-standing residents of Nova Scotia, residents who have been assessed values, and thus the property taxes paid on these properties increased dramatically. Over the years, the value of the land in our coastal communities has become more and more valuable for wealthy individuals who want to build palatial homes for summer use. The values of these homes and the demand for these homes on them have led the market value to skyrocket, not only for their properties, but also for the properties around them. And Madam Speaker, that's why one part of the bill that I do oppose is the placing of a cap, because market value fluctuates and a cap does not. Is it the fault of the long-standing resident? No, it's not. They are being forced to pay huge amounts of property taxes. Yes, they are. And the change has not been gradual. Increases in assessment to the value of over $100,000 is not uncommon. And they happen in less than 12 months in some instances. The increases have been placing a burden on long-standing homeowners, forcing them in some cases to sacrifice their quality of life to pay the increased taxes, or forcing them to give up their family homes. The government has proposed a base year system for residents going back to 2001-2002. The first comment I would have on that is, what about those affected prior to 2001-2002? There has been a problem I have been hearing about for a number of years, and I am concerned some of the people affected prior to 2001-2002 may not be covered with this bill. I'm happy to see the government allowing properties to be held in families, being passed down from parent to child or grandparent to grandchild. It is important to allow families to maintain their family homes and allow generations to benefit from hard work being done over the years. Allowing the families whose parents, grandparents, and even great-grandparents helped build these beautiful coastal communities be able to afford to live in these communities is only fair. Madam Speaker, the second group affected are municipalities. For municipalities who are struggling to survive, the added tax revenue of the increased assessments has given them the ability to provide the services that their residents want and deserve. The bill will cut into that newfound wealth, and it's for that reason, I suspect, which is the motivation of the UNSM to oppose the proposed change. I feel that municipalities in this situation, on one hand, are bringing in revenue they need to deliver their services, and then on the other hand are being restricted to provide those very services. On the other hand, you're forcing your founding families to leave their homes. I wonder if the government has considered some of the compensation for municipalities who are going to see a decline in their tax base. And will the government offer assistance to those affected municipalities who will be facing massive deficits because of the bill if it's passed? And that is if it is passed, Madam Speaker. We have asked these questions because they're unfair to force families out of their homes. It's unfair to drastically cut back on municipal tax base overnight. The Liberal caucus will be supporting this bill because it is the first step in addressing a very serious problem, and also because we want to hear from homeowners, community groups, and municipal leaders at law amendments. As I have stated, this is the first step in the right direction, and I hope the government listens to the opposition and to those who present at law amendments. I hope that the government is willing to entertain amendments to this bill if points are made or suggestions on how this bill can be made stronger when they are presented. Keeping that in mind, Madam Speaker, I would like to attempt to present the position as put forward by the UNSM, for which I've belonged to for a number of years, and being the municipal critic, would like to bring it forth on their behalf. And as explained, the bill, the explanatory note explains that the bill empowers the governing council to limit the increase in assessed value. Limit the increase. There's a problem right there. In residential and resource properties for municipal taxation purposes, so long as those properties continue to be owned by the same person or certain close relatives. Madam Speaker, an assessment cap is not the best mechanism to assist those on low or fixed incomes facing high tax bills as a result of rising assessments. People on low income will figure, oh boy, thank heavens, there is a cap, it's going to work, I'm safe, I don't have to worry about high assessments. But if a municipality were to require additional tax revenue, all they have to do is raise the rate of taxation on that assessment, and up goes their tax bill. So that's not the answer. The UNSM objects to Bill 40 in a variety of reasons which are outlined in this paper here. The UNSM's position is that the current situation could be better addressed through a tax exemption or a tax deferral law created through existing mechanisms in the Municipal Government Act and Municipal Grants Act. The UNSM recommends the following principles be addressed to reduce the dramatically rising assessments. And what they're doing, Madam Speaker, they have a number of points that I'd like to make. That no Nova Scotian should be forced from their home due to high assessment increases and the related tax burden. Any proposed tax relief provision should not provide a tax subsidy to the wealthy at the expense of the taxpayer. The market value standard of the assessment system should not be altered, and any proposed changes should be acceptable to the majority of municipalities in the province and should not hamper natural growth in municipal revenues. And the proposed system should be simple to understand and inexpensive to implement and administer. Madam Speaker, why the UNSM objects to these bills? The first one is if it alters the market system, value system of assessment. All assessment notices sent to the province of Nova Scotia property owners emphasize the market value approach to assessment as the most equitable and widely accepted system in North America. Every province in Canada uses this approach, as do most assessment jurisdictions in the United States and 127 other countries. Market value is the most widely accepted model for determined property assessment, as it is easily understood by most property owners. It is a transparent and is objectively determined and equitably applied to property owners. Altering assessments from a market value system creates inequities by allowing subsidization of certain properties by all other property owners. Taking this important first step away from the accepted market value system will impact future municipal revenues, hinder growth and development, and potentially anger remaining stakeholders such as the business community and other taxpayers. The UNSM appreciates that a limited number of cases, the market system value has produced spikes in assessment that increase the property owner's tax burden to very high levels. These isolated situations can be addressed in other ways. Secondly, Madam Speaker, The UNSM, it assumes the problem is the result of dramatically rising assessments as opposed to high property taxes caused by dramatically rising assessments. The fundamental problem facing residents with dramatically rising property assessments is a significant increase in their property tax bills. The increase is a result of significant assessment increases due to market changes. The result is an unfair shift in the tax burden if some form of relief is not provided. The UNSM suggests that the solution falls under the taxation powers of the Municipal Government Act and the Municipal Grants Act, as opposed to the Assessment Act. Number 3, Madam Speaker, it would create 2 assessment rolls. The bill uses the term taxable assessed value to indicate the new assessment that would occur as the result of the cap. This bill could result in producing 2 assessment rolls, the standard market value roll and another roll representing the capped properties. The UNSM is concerned that the significant cost issues associated with implementing the 2 rolls, as well as providing an appeal process for the program. These additional costs would be borne by all property taxpayers. Number 4, it attempts to provide a province-wide solution to a local problem. This I take exception to personally myself. I've always tried to preach the word flexibility because one size does not fit all. Initially, the taxpayers in Victoria County, the District of Chester, and the District of Lunenburg expressed concerns over dramatically increasing assessments on their properties. The solution as currently proposed would impact on all municipal units, not just those affected by dramatically increasing assessments. It is a province-wide approach that does not provide municipal flexibility to tailor responses to local circumstances in terms of the extent of assessment growth and need for subsidy. Flexibility there, Madam Speaker, is the operative word. The UNSM's proposed alternatives to the bill. They are proposing 3 options: the creation of a tax exemption bylaw, a tax deferral bylaw, or a combination of the 2. And the tax exemption bylaw, Madam Speaker, municipalities could be specifically enabled under Section 69 of the Municipal Government Act to offer tax relief to individual property owners facing significant increases in assessment. The MGA could provide municipalities with the power to create a bylaw to identify residents with low to medium level household incomes for whom dramatically increased assessments are posing a financial hardship. The municipality could provide a tax exemption similar to that already available to low-income earners in most municipalities. By a simple application process, each qualifying household would be eligible for an exemption on any increase in property taxes on their principal residence where their assessment has increased by 25% or more in 1 year. The exempted portion of the tax bill would form part of the adjustment of the uniform assessment calculation for each municipality participating in this tax relief program. Now, let's refer to the tax deferral bylaw. Municipalities could be specifically enabled under Section 70 of the Municipal Government Act to create a bylaw that allows property tax deferral for residents facing dramatic assessment increases. The deferral amount could be adjusted to fit local circumstances. However, one approach could be to permit ratepayers to defer up to 50% of the increase in any 1 year. The taxes payable could be deferred until the ratepayer was able to pay the amount outstanding or until death of the property owner or sale of the property occurs. Halifax Regional Municipality has recently implemented such a system. Early experience is favorable. Let's go to number 3, the combination of a tax exemption and a tax deferral. There are many possible combinations of the tax exemption, tax deferral approaches that could be applied in response to the issue of dramatic increases in property assessments. One example would provide for 50% of any increase above 25% in 1 year to be offset by a program of tax exemption. Ratepayers could have the opportunity to defer part or all of the balance under the general conditions outlined under alternative number 2 above. And the criteria for tax exemption deferral bylaw, Madam Speaker, it could be that eligibility for tax relief would be assessed by a means test based on a maximum household income level determined by each municipality. The means test would also apply to the transfer of property to a family member. Eligibility for tax relief could be based on the annual assessment increase of 25% or more. The annual assessment increase would factor in land and buildings. Eligible tax relief would only apply to ratepayers considered full-time Nova Scotia residents whose residential property is considered their principal residence as defined under the Federal Income Tax Act, or whose property is owned 100% by Nova Scotia residents. The application of 25% or more as a limit of tax assessment relief should be subject to an adjustment of new construction or renovations that have contributed to the increase for that year. A single assessment roll would be maintained reflecting property values at market value. The assessment of tax relief provided for ratepayers experiencing dramatically rising assessments would be deducted from the uniform assessment of a municipality in the same manner as registered charities under the Municipal Grants Act. So, Madam Speaker, there's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, and maybes. There's a lot of consideration to be given to this act, and I must say that one-size-fits-all does not work most anywhere in the province, and I'm looking forward to this coming to law amendments and having presentations made, and I know that the Honourable Minister will be open to any legitimate, sound suggestions that may improve the act when it comes forward. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak on this act.
The honourable member from Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Madam Speaker, here we are again. And here's the issue again. The issue that just won't go away. Just won't go away. And Madam Speaker, for your benefit, if I may, and it's nice to see you in the chair again, I want to tell you that when I first was elected to this legislature, one of the first questions that I asked the Liberal minister at the time, and he was sitting right now, if I believe I could be corrected, where the current Minister of Tourism is. And I nervously stood in my place, and I said to that minister, I am concerned because of what I've heard during the recent election in the coastal communities that I represent, and I've heard from other constituents, from Lunenburg, from Cape Breton. I've heard from other areas and their residents about the concern about assessments and how coastal communities are really having a problem with the issue of non-resident ownership. And as the minister, who I think at the time was more nervous than I was, he turned behind him to the Minister of Labor at the time, next to him, okay, my geography's off. And the veteran minister turned to the Minister of Labor, and the answer was, what's the big deal? That's not a big concern. Why are you concerned about something that's really of not a great deal of importance? And Mr. Speaker, let me tell you, the concern that I had is based upon the fact that when you bring an issue up that gets you elected, Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker.
Please. All right. The honourable member from Cape Breton West on a point of order, I believe.
Madam Speaker, the point to which the honourable member has just raised has absolutely no basis in fact whatsoever, because the reality is I didn't sit next to the Minister of Municipal Affairs in that particular government.
It's not a point of order, but just a disagreement between two members. The honourable member from Timberley Prospect.
I can name the particular minister I was dealing with because he's not here, and I miss him because of his sense of humor and his Gaelic. But let me tell you, that particular minister at that time was given the advice, this is not a big deal. Don't worry about it, Kenny McCaskill. It's going to go away. Well, guess what? It has not gone away. It has not gone away. The minister who was handling that particular issue, and then, of course, when it was brought on to the Minister of Municipal Affairs, The concern was that's just a local issue in one riding of one coastal community represented by the NDP MLA from Timberley Prospect. It's not a big deal. And subsequent to that, Madam Speaker, I had the privilege of introducing a bill to look at this particular issue. And at that time, when the bill was brought forward, that was the same response from the members of the third party. The same response. What's this all about? This is no big deal. This is nothing that we should be concerned about. Until they looked in the bill and it said it wasn't just coastal properties, it also involved waterfronts, it involved the area around the Bedore Lakes, it involved the issue that whenever we have coastal properties, or any kind of water, salt water, fresh water, we have a problem with escalating land values because of the issues that revolve around non-resident ownership. Now, what came out of that was that certain Nova Scotians began to speak up. And this particular piece of legislation, and that minister opposite, to his credit, has been listening to backbenchers over there who've been having their say with him, saying, you've got to do something about this, because this is a big deal. And I would like to table for the approbation of the House an election ad from the Masthead News. Chattaway's policy on assessments. And I'm gonna table it here in a moment. Chattaway's policy on assessments. Chester St. Margaret's has received their preliminary assessments. Call the assessment office for clarification. The formal assessments come to an end, and he mentions the date December 3. Then you can, in big letters, appeal, appeal, appeal. That was the policy of the member from Chester St. Margaret's during that election campaign. And there's other members over there, and I look forward to hearing the member from Chester St. Margaret's speak on this piece of legislation. I'm sure that there are other members who represent coastal communities who sit in the back benches. They know that this is an issue that is of real concern to the people that they represent. They know that this is a doorstep issue that when it happens again and when the election's called within the next number of weeks or the next number of months, when the time calls again, when they go to Chester St. Margaret's, when they knock on those doors, that question's going to be put to that MLA. What have you done about assessments, except run an ad during the election that my campaign advice is appeal, appeal, and appeal? So I look forward to hearing the member from Chester St. Margaret's. I look forward to seeing him stand in his place on this important, controversial, and I would like to add, emotional issue. Emotional issue, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, if I may, what has happened subsequent to the...
Order, please. I believe the member from Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley has a point of order.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I wonder if the honourable member for Timberley Prospect would or has tabled that document that was paid for by the Chester St. Margaret's Riding Association, not the taxpayers of this province. I wonder if the honourable member would table that document here in the legislature.
Thank you. Yes, would the honourable member from Timberley Prospect please table the document? When you're finished, he did table it.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
Not to question your point, but the member from the beautiful member from Colchester St. Margaret's. What did I say here? I've not only got the wrong member, but I've also described him as beautiful. The member from beautiful Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley. That member was not paying attention. That member has to understand that in his constituency, based upon some of the complaints that he's going to hear about assessments, they are going to bring that up as a doorstep issue when the time comes again. This particular piece of legislation, and I've already said to the member the minister personally, and I say it to him again publicly. He's had the courage to take this issue on, to move it out into the public domain, to have it go to law amendments so that we can hear from the various stakeholders involved, unlike the members of the Liberal Party. Unlike the members of the Liberal Party, the members of the third party who have never had the courage when they sat on that side of the House to deal with the issue. To deal with the issue.